Welcome to Amidst the Chaos, the podcast where we dare to find God in the middle of real life, not just the highlight reel. I'm your host, Amber Gallion, and around here we build on one foundation only, Jesus. In each episode, I'll share my journey with God, wins, wounds, questions and all, and how He brings order, clarity, and peace into the chaos of everyday life. So take a breath, bring whatever you're carrying today, and let's lean into the one who never changes, even when everything else does. Hey friend, welcome back to Amidst the Chaos. I'm Amber and I'm really glad you're here. Across these episodes, I've been sharing of my journey with God, how He restores detours and pulls back into our golden path. You don't need to have heard any of the other episodes to follow along today. But if this one resonates, you might enjoy going back later and catching the rest of the story. For now, thanks for pressing play. Thanks for giving me a bit of your time and attention. Let's dive in. I want to take you into a very specific moment. I was driving in my car in the middle of a season where my marriage felt heavy. Not we had one argument heavy, but years of misalignment, pain and patterns that weren't changing. Deep down, I knew something was off. I knew this wasn't the best for me, but the idea of leaving felt impossible. As I was driving, a song came on the radio by a Dutch band called Bluff. And there was a line in that song that basically says, "If you jump into the deep, you'll land well." And it hit me like a spotlight, not because I built my life on song lyrics, I don't, but because in that moment, that line was used to press on something a voice already had been whispering. You're going to have to trust me enough to jump. You can't keep clinging to the shallow end and expect a different life. Back then, I didn't realize it was God, but I did sense it was something I could trust. It felt a bit like Abraham in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 8, obeying and going even though I had no idea where I was going to land. It wasn't about being impulsive. It wasn't about chasing a feeling. It was about finally acknowledging what was true. I was in a covenant that was slowly breaking me, and staying out of fear was not the kind of faithfulness God was asking for. If you've ever stood on that kind of edge, the mental battle. What if I'm overreacting? What if I'm the problem? What if it gets better if I just try harder? What will people think? What happens to my child? Where will I live? How will I pay for anything? It's a whole tsunami of what ifs, which is fear-based. Divorce is never a small decision, and I'm not romanticizing it. I'm definitely not telling anyone just leave. What I am talking about is that the holy tension where God has been nudging you for a long time, where you've had more conversations, more tears, more attempts to fix things than anyone ever sees, and you realize staying is disobedience now. I'm not saving the marriage anymore. I'm sacrificing myself in a way that goes beyond dying to yourself what marriage is about. That was the place I was in. And in the car that day, with that lyric echoing in my chest, I felt God say, "It's time. You're not going to see the whole plan. You're going to have to jump and discover that I'm the net." After that drive, I didn't sit on it for months. I didn't start 10 more pros and cons lists. I went home. I had the conversation. I said out loud what had been true in my heart for a long time, that I wanted a divorce, that I couldn't and wouldn't continue like this. Those conversations are never easy. There's emotion, shock, confusion, defense. And what I want you to know is what happened inside of me. The moment I spoke the words, two things showed up at the same time. A deep, quiet relief and a wave of terror. Relief because the pretending was over. Terror because now the someday decision had become today. In that season, I had to learn to lean on Proverbs chapter 3, verses 5 and 6. Trust in the Lord with all my heart and to stop leaning on my own understanding because my understanding was screaming, "This is impossible." Once you cross that line, the very next questions are brutally practical. What does co-parenting look like? Where am I going to live? How do we divide everything? How do I do this without a family safety net? I didn't have a spare house waiting. I didn't have a huge savings buffer. I didn't have parents I could just move back in with. Everything in the natural said, this is irresponsible. You should have had everything secured first. But that's not how this played out. We put the house up for sale, and there was a timeline attached and a moment where I actually had to leave, not just emotionally, but physically. And there I was looking at the date on the calendar thinking, God, I did the brave part. Now I need to see you show up in the logistics. Right when I needed an answer, doors started opening in ways I couldn't have orchestrated. Someone offered me the opportunity to stay at a camping site, not in a tiny, miserable space, but in a place with actual breathing room, nature, water nearby, and space for my child to play. There was this little cabin, this chalet, that became available at just the right time. It wasn't glamorous, it needed love, care, work, and a lot of cleaning, but it was there and it was possible. I went from I have no idea where I'm going to live to I have a place that feels like a strange kind of in between holiday. It wasn't the forever home, it wasn't the final promise, but it was a clear sign. You jumped and I caught you. The timing, the availability, the atmosphere, it all carried that quiet signature of God. Practical enough to make sense, specific enough that I knew it wasn't just a coincidence. Looking back, this is the pattern I see in that season. God confronted the truth I already knew deep down. He invited me to respond in obedience, not in denial. The clarity about the next steps only came after the decision and not before. And most of us want it the other way around. We tell God, I'll obey when you show me the full plan, the 5-year forecast, the financial breakdown, and the guarantee that absolutely no one will judge me. But that's not obedience, that's negotiation. Obedience often looks like this. You see enough to know the current thing is not aligned with Him. You feel Him asking you to step out. You don't know exactly what comes next. You choose to trust His character more than your need for control. And then, as you walk, things start lining up. You really have to actually live by faith and not by sight, like 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 7 says. I want to say something important here. There's a big difference between running away from discomfort because it's hard and stepping out of something because God has been showing you it's no longer aligned with Him. If you're in a rough patch, that doesn't automatically mean leave. Sometimes the bravest thing is to stay, to fight, to get help, to heal. But sometimes the bravest thing is to admit, this isn't safe, this isn't holy, this isn't repairable in the way I hoped. Staying is costing me the person God is shaping me to be. I can't tell you which one applies to you, that's between you and God, and often wise counsel too. What I can tell you is this. God is not honored by you staying in something that is slowly killing your soul out of fear of what happens if you leave. He is a God of truth. He is a God of life. He is a God who asks hard things sometimes, but He is never careless with your heart. God is still the one who says in Hebrews chapter 13, verse 5, I will never leave you or forsake you. As we land this episode, I want to give you a few questions you can take into prayer, journaling, or a quiet walk. Where am I clinging to the shallow end because I'm afraid of jumping into the deep with God? Is there an area, relationship, job, city, commitment, where I know the truth deep down, but I'm delaying obedience because I want guarantees first? What would it look like to say, Lord, if you're asking me to step out, I trust you to meet me in the practical details and actually mean it. You don't have to make massive decisions overnight. You don't have to blow up your life, but you can start by telling God the truth. This is where I'm scared. This is where I'm staying out of fear, not out of faith. Show me if you're asking me to jump, and if you are, give me the courage to trust that you'll catch me. If this episode stirred something in you, don't rush past it. Take some time after listening to be honest with God about the places where you feel stuck, trapped, or terrified of the deep end. In my own story, saying yes to the unknown in my marriage was one of the hardest decisions I've ever made. But it also became the doorway to seeing God's provision in very specific, practical ways, from temporary housing solutions to the next chapters of my life. He's been showing me again and again that obedience is never a free fall. It's a leap into his hands. You're not listening to someone who had it all figured out first. You're listening to someone who jumped, shaking, and is now watching in real time how God builds from that yes. Thank you so much for being here with me today on Amidst the Chaos. If this encouraged you, you can share it with someone who might be standing on their own edge right now, wondering if they dare to trust God with the next step. All right, we'll leave it here today. Thanks for listening to Amidst the Chaos. I'm your host, Amber Gallion, and my prayer is that today's episode helped you see Jesus a little more clearly right in the middle of your own mess and motion. If this encouraged you, share it with someone who might need the reminder that God is building order, even when life feels anything but stable. Until next time, keep walking, keep wrestling, and keep building on the only foundation that won't move, Jesus.